Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can see and hear both myself and Gerald Evans. My name is Nick Barrett and I'm Director of Learner and Discovery Services at the Open University. We're here to talk to you about some of the support that we've been providing to help learners move online, both those who are teaching the courses and of course many of our students who have had to undertake rapid change. We want to explore various aspects of teaching and learning online, particularly some of the pedagogy that sits behind it, and maybe even dispel some of the myths that somehow a learning experience online is a second-class experience to face-to-face. I'm going to introduce Gerald and then hopefully another panelist, Gary, very shortly. But please do feel free to post some questions in the chat bar on the side. We'll pick them up at the end as we go through. The session's really in three parts. I'm going to do a quick introduction and then hand to Gerald to talk about some of the learning design that we use at the Open University. Thanks also for the note about the fish tank. It's the only natural or semi-natural light I get, so thanks, Alice. Then I'm going to pick up myself and cover for a colleague from the Institute of Educational Technology. This is a fantastic research institute. It's been going for 50 years and it underpins all of the pedagogy that lies within our modules and courses that we've created and continue to create. And then hand over to Gary Elliott Sirigotis, who is struggling to join us at the moment, but hopefully will be here by the time his slot picks up. And he'll talk about some of the support we provide to our students with a particular focus on the library, which is the hub of both of our undergrad and postgrad support, but also for many of our staff. And it provides distance learning support and resource to all of our learners. So I'm going to start by just putting up a slide deck. Hopefully that won't take too long. Hopefully you can see that screen now. And I just want to run through a few points just to give you some introduction about what the OU does and how long it's been doing it for. So we've been working in this space for 50 years. We were founded in 1969, as I'm sure many of you know, with a social mission at our heart to try and open up learning to people who perhaps haven't had a chance to experience higher education before. And as a result, we adopted very early on a distance learning model, originally correspondence, then paper-based, and increasingly these days a blended or purely online model. The department that I have the great pleasure and privilege of looking after, Learner and Discovery Services, creates the course content at scale. We have a range of different teams, which I'll come on to in a minute, which includes the library, but also some of our free learning resources as well. We provide content not just for our students, but for our Open Learn platform, and also FutureLearn, one of our other platforms, a range of high quality learning experiences for free. So you can try and test. Many of these are based on some of the skills you'll need, foundational skills, to get you into some of our core curriculum. What we thought we'd do today is just run through some of the services that we obviously use ourselves, but increasingly during the time of the pandemic, we think we might be able to offer up. There's a learning pack and resource pack that goes with today's talk. You've got access to the slides, and we're very happy to pick up conversations at the end. One of the things that we have been doing, not just for ourselves, but increasingly for other organizations, is provide online program management services, which includes the design and delivery of courses. That's often shaped by design workshops and drawing upon some of the pedagogy that lies behind all of our approaches to distance and online learning. We've got a great track record in both adapting and curating third-party content, particularly open education resources. There's a huge amount of material out there already, which will really enhance the student experience. You don't always have to create things from scratch. We both create and host our own platform services. I've mentioned Open Learn and FutureLearn, but our main virtual learning environment is Moodle. And we work with many of our partners and clients on project and program management. So it's not just about delivering something, we help support some of that learning journey over time as well. And increasingly, as many of you I'm sure are exploring, we're looking at how we can develop AI interfaces, not just to produce things more effectively, but to learn about our students. So we're being taught and we amend our courses based on some of the analytics that we are applying to student behavior. So there are all sorts of AI activities that we embed in the way we design and produce our courses. We do this at scale. We have over 175,000 students, so that's a vast amount that we have to look after. And therefore we have a huge production engine that sits behind the development and production of courses. Our department, LDS, has been doing this for over 20 years. We look after over 350 modules of various sizes, 10, 15, 30, and 60 credits, sometimes even larger than that. I think one of our largest is 120 credits. And these are some of the units that provide the expertise to design, develop, produce, and maintain all of these rich assets, as well as print material at scale. We're able to draw upon the library, and when Gary's joined us, I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about that, but also a range of unique material as a result of our partnership with the BBC. We work very closely with them to help shape some of their core programming, providing academic expertise, and also developing this joint approach to social mission. So Blue Planet 2, for example, is a co-production that we had. And we find that people then come to us to pick up some of their digital experience through different learning techniques. We like to think we're relatively rapid, and this is something when we are working with external clients that's really important. And some of you who are obviously trying to move your learning online will realize, as we'll talk about the design process, it's not just a lift and shift of existing assets and it replicates the experience. There's a lot of thought and planning that goes behind it. It can take between 12 and 18 months to build a 60 credit module from scratch, but we've been increasingly creating shorter, smaller and focused courses. We put together a primer in online counselling to help people who are struggling with the pandemic in only 11 days. And we're increasingly developing a range of accredited learning courses. We call them micro-credentials, but they're essentially accredited short courses, which are often 15 credit modules. The quickest we've managed to do that is 6 weeks. We are by design a 4-nation organisation, and during the pandemic we provided digital skills toolkits for a variety of government departments, from UK Department of Education, Department of Work and Pensions, and Business Enterprises and Industrial Strategy, to some of the platforms that the devolved governments were looking for to help boost skill sets for furloughed workers or those, sadly, who might be facing the real prospect of unemployment. But as I've mentioned already, this isn't just about accredited learning. We produce MOOCs, short courses, and increasingly bespoke learning products for further education colleges as we try and provide that lifelong partnership model rather than just a more transactional model at an undergrad level. And that has brought us into contact with a range of government agencies, not-for-profits, and increasingly corporate clients who also want to draw upon some of our experience and pedagogic design. This is just a very quick list of some of our recent clients. Like I said, we're open to talk to anyone around how we can deploy our skills. So in one sense, we're almost a consulting university in that respect. And that's in many ways an interesting conversation that we'd be very happy to have at the end of this session about how we might help you move some of your learning online. Right, I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to pass over to Gerald. And he's going to talk about some of the learning design that underpins all of the courses and our approach to learning that I've just been outlining very, very briefly.
Okay, thank you, Nick, for that. Yes, so as Nick says, I'm going to talk about learning design approaches. So I'm head of learning design at the Open University within LDS. One of the first things I wanted to cover was around what students are saying to us about their experience of distance learning during the pandemic and lockdown. So unsurprisingly, they're reporting back to us that the experience is very different to normal distance learning, but there's a mix of experiences. So some are struggling with motivation, others are much more motivated and seeing study as a good escape, and some have actually been able to finish their studies early. But it's been interesting to bear in mind that things are very different for distance learning students now compared to, say, 12 months ago, and that as we look ahead in the next 12 months, I'm sure that will shift again as well. One particular module team that did a survey of their students found that 70% of their students now had less time to study. So that's been a consideration in terms of how we need to be empathetic to students at the moment as well, and how we need to be supporting them and helping them with their well-being. So I'm going to talk a bit about learning design, and I'm going to cover aspects of our learning design process that will support with designing for online. This process has evolved over the course of about 10 or 11 years that we've been working with learning design. Our initial work in this field came out of a project we ran in collaboration with JISC and a number of other institutions between 2008 and 2011, and it's now embedded across all OU curriculum. Some of those approaches are still being used from there, but we've adapted quite a number of them and evolved them over time. So our starting point with all module work is to run a learning design workshop to help teams to articulate the vision for their module and to capture it. We then develop a learning design plan which looks at particular actions that we're going to take to help the team meet design challenges. And then as it goes through production, we'll hopefully be able to step back, having worked through all of those challenges, and then when the modules first presenting to students, we'll be coming back in to look at how the students are getting on with the module and to be then advising on any interventions that might be needed. And what we're looking at then at the end is to be able to complete our work by identifying any good case studies and scholarship opportunities and feed those back in. So the starting point for all of our learning design workshops is to think about the students, understanding who the students are, and we use student profiles and student profile template for this. And this covers areas such as study motivation, tuition likes and dislikes, study skills, strengths and weaknesses. And the aim of this is to get the team together to be thinking about who the students are, both in terms of the students that they've had perhaps in the past, or the students that they think they're going to be getting onto the module, or aiming to get onto the module from a marketing perspective as well. And there's a number of different sources that we can use for this. So we can draw on data that we've already got from past experience for this, but we can also draw on any particular aspects of, as I say, of the marketing that we're trying, the types of students that we're trying to encourage. And these are useful then to be able to feed into design considerations further down the line. So we can be then thinking, as we're looking at design, 3 to 6 months further on, whether or not the design that we're coming up with is going to work for the students that we've identified here. One of the key considerations of designing with a student focus is to be thinking about the student workload, and that's particularly relevant when we're thinking about the situation we're in at the moment with the pandemic. We try to do this by planning for a consistent number of hours each week. So for a 60 credit undergraduate module that's delivered over 30 weeks, we'll actually be delivering 13 hours of module directed study per week, and then there'll be an allowance of up to 7 hours for student directed study. So that's where the students are further developing their study skills, undertaking studentship and additional research on top of what's directed from the module. And some of the considerations in this are that as they're working online, they'll need time to learn new tools. The online experience itself can be more time, and what we're aiming for is to be planning activities which can be done in chunks, so thinking about 30-minute to 1 hour activities. One of the other key considerations for us is to develop with a balance of activity types. So we've got a taxonomy which consists of 7 categories of student activity types as listed on here. So what we're looking for is to make sure that we're encouraging and developing active learning approaches. So we're trying to ensure that there's not too much assimilative content and assimilative activities, but a good balance incorporating finding and handling information activities, which are typically library activities, drawing on articles and research, communicative activities where students might be discussing theories and concepts with other students, productive activities, experiential activities where they're applying learning in a real world setting, or interactive adaptive where they're applying that in a simulated setting, and then assessment as well. So what we're looking for is getting a good balance of those activity types. And we know from OU research that communicative activities in particular are key. And we also know that if we've got too high a proportion of assimilative activities, that those can be a problem for student retention. So early on, we'll try to get a sense of what the aspirations are for that particular module, what kind of balance we're looking at. And there's a couple of examples that you can see on here. So the top one's got a very high amount of experiential activities, but also a good blend of communicative and productive in there as well. And then the bottom one has got a very high assimilative content, and no communication at all. So if we were having conversations early on with a team, we would be encouraging the bottom one of these to be building in much more communicative activity for the students, for instance. And this gives us an idea early on of the type of module that it is that's being planned, and we can then, as we're going through and we're designing the module, we're able to look at this then using our learning design tools to look at each week and to see whether or not each week that's being designed is then matching this and where there might be potential issues as we're going along. And sometimes deviation from the intent, the initial aspiration can be for good and planned reasons, but other times it might need something that's that requires intervention. So how do we go about creating that activity-based design? So one of the tools we've got is what we call an activity planner. So here we map out each week of the module, the learning outcomes and skills that are being covered in that particular week, and then the types of activities that are being built in. So for this one, this is a week that's around consumer decision making. There's a couple of learning outcomes that have been captured here. And then there's a balance of assimilative, communicative, and experiential activities for that particular week. And what we'd look to do is over time build that up, and then we can look and understand the type of student experience that we're going to be building. And as mentioned, we can start to look at whether or not there are issues in terms of how the activity balance is looking, and also whether or not the activities are aligning to the assessment and the learning outcomes as planned. What we're also looking at as we're going along and encouraging people to be thinking about is whether the students have got the requisite skills to do this. So for a particular activity in a particular week, have the students already got the skills to do this, or do we need to be thinking about those skills and developing that before they come to that activity? So that's at a high level, and then wanted to touch on designing an individual activity and how that, and using a VLE tool to support that. So as I've mentioned, the design of activity should be thinking about the learning outcomes and assessment, and it should be helping learners to develop skills in accordance with those. And also, as I mentioned just now, it's good to be thinking about questions when designing. So do the activities give learners a clear context to develop their skills? Will they understand why they're engaging in an activity and how it relates to their learning? So there are three parts to an activity at the simplest level that to consider for online design. So firstly, what will the learners be doing? So what's the learning outcome? What will they be creating as a result of the activity? And then lastly, what platform will they be using to facilitate the activity? So what tool will they be using? And to give a couple of simple examples of how that might look. So first one might be where the students are sharing. So in this case, the students might be doing some really basic research on a topic, bringing it back and sharing it with their group. So for that, they might need a library search tool to be able to do that research. And they might need a wiki or a discussion or a chat tool to be enabling them to have that sharing discussion with their peers. And another example could be where the students are asked to reflect. So in this case, they might be asked to reflect on their current week's study. And in this case, they might use a blog or a forum or a wiki as a VLE tool to reflect on their study. So these are examples from the OU VLE, but there may be different tools that you've got in your own VLE that would support those. So there are a number of considerations to think about with online activities, some of which I've already touched on. So if the tools are new to the students, or if the skills are new to the students, then they're going to need additional time to get to grips with those. That you might need to provide guidance on the tools. And you might also need to be, you will need to be thinking about the skills that they need to undertake the activity and making sure that you're supporting them through developing those skills. And lastly, just to touch on the fact that sometimes the tool that we're thinking about using can be harder to use than we anticipate, and it's important to think about the difficulty of learning the tool versus the importance of the activity. So in the OU context, we've got a number of tools that we describe as heavyweight tools that have got a high learning curve. We wouldn't use them as a one-off. We would build that in throughout a module, and we would slowly build up the complexity of what we're asking students to do through that module with that specific tool. So it's important to be thinking about what the activity is and whether or not it really needs a complex tool to be supporting it. I also wanted to touch on how we go about testing activities. So it's great to be able to test activities before they go live, particularly if they're innovative activities. We use an online student panel called the Curriculum Design Student Panel for this. So this is within our VLE. We've got a panel of up to 2,000 students, and we can send a sample of those students links to particular activity to test before a module goes live. And we find that a really effective way for making sure that we can refine activities, but also in some cases actually take activities out if there's a problem. So it may not be possible to do exactly that at your institution, but it would be good to be exploring options for testing, even if that's with colleagues. I think just getting into a habit of refining the steps of an activity in particular before going live can be really worthwhile. So lastly, I just wanted to touch on how you can work with us or draw on some of the resources and expertise that we've got in our team. So we make a lot of our resources available online. So we've got an activity design template and the activity planner that I've described, as well as the student profile template, are all available from our blog, as well as guidance on collaborative activities, quizzes and online rooms. And we share a lot through our Twitter account as well. And then beyond that, we can also run a learning design workshop externally, so we can tailor that to your needs and to your curriculum. We can run train the trainer type sessions, and we can also do evaluation using data, so we can support on how to get going with using learning analytics to make evidence-based improvements to curriculum. So that's everything from me, and there's how you can get in touch with us. And I'll stop sharing at this point and hand back to Nick.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to get my slides back up and talk a little bit around some of our distance learning pedagogy, the scholarship and the research that lies behind some of the learning design, and also a range of other activities, particularly thinking about online teaching and learner skills that are infused throughout all of our courses. I should say at this point that I'm not a senior lecturer at the Institute of Educational Technology. That would be stretching multitasking a little bit thin. Sadly, our colleague can't make it, so I'm covering Rebecca Ferguson's slides at this point. A little bit about the Institute of Educational Technology before we start. This is one of a number of very advanced institutions and institutes at the OU that focus on either distance learning pedagogy or some of the tools and technologies that support it. IET work very closely with the Knowledge Media Institute, particularly around the application and testing of new technologies so that we can incorporate them into our learning design and courses. What we find though is that, as you'd expect, a blended approach is the way that many of our learners best respond to some of the challenges of distance learning. But having said that, one of the key things we're always keen to do is research new techniques and then use that to drive innovation. And it's not just our innovation, it's sector-wide innovation. So one of the things that IET does is work and collaborate with different HEIs, organisations, to find the best practice and gather that together and produce an annual report called Innovating Pedagogy. These reports are freely available. They've been published since 2012, and you can find them via the link that's on the screen. Again, I said in the chat, but I'll be sharing all of these screenshots and also a resource pack where the resources are covered in more detail. The aim here is really to explore new forms of teaching, learning and assessment, not just from a student perspective, but also from a teaching perspective as well. And that's one thing really to consider when you are looking to shift a substantial amount of your teaching and learning online. It's not just about student needs you need to consider, it's also thinking about some of those skills and innovative techniques that your tutors and lecturers need to adopt as well. And these reports summarize some of the best practices, some of the tools you might want to evolve, and produce them on a free basis. What we've learned through our own research and also from sector-wide practice is that there are a variety of different methods that actually work, as opposed to all the failed attempts that haven't. So this really is that distillation process of 50 years of thinking and research in this space. We've created 10 worksheets and resource packs, again, freely available via our website, blogs Innovating, that just bring together in a thematic way some of the key lessons that we've learned that you might want to apply when you start moving your teaching and learning online. There are 10 here. I'm not going to cover all of them, but I do want to explore some of them in a bit more detail because they are the most relevant ones and they will tackle some of the problems that we're going to face in the next semester and possibly beyond. Challenges from teachers, but also some of the challenges that our learners will throw up to us as well. One of the key points to mention right from start is this concept of flipped learning. And in many ways, this goes back to the way we were taught to learn from a very early age. When you first go to school, you are taught to respond to someone at the front telling you things. Obviously, pedagogic practice in the classroom has changed a lot. So there's far more fun play and learning through play, more technology, but it is still that sense that you are there to respond to someone telling you things. And of course, when you start to work in an online environment, particularly if there's very little face-to-face contact, it's a completely different model. And that's even more so at the OU when a vast majority of our learners are juggling all sorts of other commitments. They may already have full-time jobs, carer responsibilities. Many of our learners have disabilities, which makes traditional learning very hard. We also support a large number of students in secure environments. So in many ways, we have to flip the learning model. And that in many ways is around how you choose to interact with our learning materials in a certain way and at a certain time. So what we try and do is build this flipped learning model into everything that we do. So it's about ensuring the material is ready at that point of study when the student is ready to study. And that's a really important point when you are looking at a learning environment. It isn't necessarily always going to be the case that you have built-in locked down times in a regular timetable that students are often used to. This is very much around self-motivation, self-organization. The flipped learning model helps many, but others will struggle. So it is around how you think that they can get help from their tutors, but also their support network, including family members. We do try and build in a range of live sessions so we can explore subjects, not just with the support of the teacher, but also classmates as well. And peer-to-peer learning is something we'll come back to. It's a really important aspect of the learning design that we've found. So some key points to think about is making sure that we're setting up a framework where all learning resources are available to students pretty much from the get-go. We do phase and put some blocks in, but in many ways it's for them to explore and learn at their own pace, with some of the assessments being those fixed moments that they have to then come back as a cohort. We need to put learning in the right place. So thinking around which bits, as Gerald said, with the learning design can be done independently, or which ones need that peer-to-peer or tutor-to-peer support, and how can we support that group work where people can start to explore and learn independently. And that's a life skill that transcends the actual course in its own right. And as a result of this flipped learning model, we find it's really important to think about how we can create time in the schedule for students just to reflect on their learning journey. What have they found difficult? How have they been challenged? We can help back this up with some of the analytics for action that supports many of our modules, where we notice student behaviours and particularly some of their performance dip or rise according to how they're interacting with some of the modules. So the data really helps us understand how students are learning, and the process of qualitative reflection reinforces whether or not we've built our courses in the right way or we've got the right level of support at the right moment. So it is an iterative process for us. Our learners are teaching us how we can support them in a better way. One of the key things we've found, though, is being upfront and open about the range of study skills that are required to do the sort of distance learning, and in particular the online learning that we've been talking about so far. So we like to provide a range of study tips for online-only modules, including things such as how you use hyperlinks, working with PDFs, etc. They're all down the side, but a more in-depth range of digital skills and capabilities, just making people are ready for some of the challenges. Have they got the right device? What is Wi-Fi access looking like? How do we support challenges with connectivity, submissions of essays, for example? So we do try and make sure our students have got those right study skills up front, but if they haven't, that's where we can point them towards some of the resources on OpenLearn and as we'll see shortly, the digital skills and learning support that the library provides our students as well. One of the key things that I mentioned earlier is the time management skills. And we've created, I won't go through them in detail here, a range of different options for people to start thinking about how to plan and prioritize work. What's the most suitable area? What's the best place to study? Someone's already called out my fish tank, which is really nice. This is a converted garage. It's the only space I've got in my house where I can actually work. And after 4 months, you do get a bit stir crazy. So you do have to think a little bit around what environment are you going to study, because that will affect your performance. Setting your study goals is really key. What do you want out of this learning experience? How are you going to achieve those goals? So there's a bit of motivation in there as well. And also some of the distractions and procrastination about working in a very different environment where that self-motivation is key, but equally distractions come in different guises compared to a traditional bricks and mortar campus-based undergraduate experience. So in many ways, this is all about learning to learn at a distance, not just learning as a student, but also learning as someone who might be embarking upon teaching at distance for the first time. This is in many ways a double approach. So the planning phase is helping the teachers think about what support students need. How are they going to intervene to help students set the goals that they value? And that planning is absolutely critical to success. As we've seen with many of the data feeds and the metrics, the more that students plan in advance, the more the performance phase is going to be smooth and effective. But having said that, there are going to be those unexpected distractions and challenges. So we try and support students by getting them to think about the strategies they will need to approach different tasks, particularly if we are moving between a range of immersive or rich media from more traditional print. And then finally, that self-reflection phase, how the tutors can then help provide a structure on learning so that students can undertake that self-evaluation and critical appraisal process. What worked well for me? What didn't work so well? How can I improve that next time? Is it something that I didn't plan properly? Was there a piece of performance that perhaps I could have done differently? Should I go and get support somewhere else? And we've summarized that in 3 key questions. What happened? You know, was that okay? What could be different? So what? So what can be done differently? How do I improve? And then what next? What have I learned? And how can I take that onto the next module or the next period of study? Equally important, we see as teach back. So learning by explaining what we have been taught. It's not just learning by rote. And this is a culture shift that some students might find a bit difficult. But the key thing here is going through the various stages of reflective learning. So the tutor would traditionally explain the topic, and the explanations can be done as multimedia assets or live to class. So the initial explanation takes place at tutor level. But then we can get our learners to start to explore a little bit more around how students can start to reflect as they go through. What have they found so far? How is it working for them? We do like the idea that students can then help each other. So maybe explain to another student how they found a piece of learning or how they approached a particular assignment. That's all really good peer-to-peer learning experience. And they just make sure that the students have understood what they've been taught or what they've learned. So in many ways, you can then have an understanding session built into your assessment. So ask them to maybe reflect on what went well. Have they understood how the teaching has been structured? Or maybe even, as we said here, devise a similar test of understanding, something they could maybe apply to some of their peer group as well. So the point I made a little bit earlier was that somehow online learning or blended learning is a secondary experience, I think needs to be challenged. We've put down the side here a range of learning methods. Again, I won't go through them all. And how learners can perhaps adapt some of those techniques. So if you're assessing something, how learners can give or receive constructive feedback. The right-hand column, the far right-hand column, shows you how some of the distance and online learning tools can help support traditional learning or possibly even transcend some of those experiences. So I think you'll find it's a really rich and varied landscape. But just to build on some of the comments that Gerald has made in his presentation, and I sort of chopped up at the beginning, this isn't something that you can do overnight. It takes us 12 to 18 months or so, sometimes longer, to design and build a 30 to 60, 60 to 120 credit module that embeds all of this learning, all of this pedagogy with the right level of tools, with the right reflection, testing it with our associate lecturers, with our students before we then present it and it goes live. And we don't often get it right first time. That's why we maintain and improve our modules as we understand how our students are responding and reacting to them. But I think the key thing here is that as we start to make those tweaks, we might bring in different techniques or different tools. We are learning with our learners and we're helping support them on their journey. Now, I just want to stop sharing briefly to see whether our third presenter is with us. I don't think he is. We've had a few technical problems getting him in. So I'm now going to share my screen again.
Nick, he is showing as an attendee, so you should be able to make him a panelist, hopefully.
Okay, let's see if we can get that done. Apologies for the slight technical hitch. We've had a few issues getting a few of us in today. There he is. Right. I'm just going to move Gary to a panelist. There he is. And hopefully, if all things are well, he should be able to share his screen and talk about the Open University Library, as he is the director of both the library and a range of different knowledge and information management services that we provide. So I'll pause there and see whether Gary is actually now able to present. He's very quiet. He's never usually this quiet. So that suggests we are still having a few technical problems. What I'll do is I'll share my screen and start working through the slides. And if Gary is able to join us, he will then boot me out unceremoniously and pick up from where I've left off. So I will resume from where we left off and talk a little bit around how our library services support our students. I love the tag, delivering a world-class innovative library to the whole OU community and beyond. And I think that's a really important point to make, in that because we're 4 nations, the OU library works with different regional consortia, Welf in Wales, Skirl in Scotland, and across the piece. I can now see Gary on screen.
Well, you can see me, and hopefully that's not too bad.
No, it's great to see you.
Okay, that's great. I apologise to everybody. It's several reboots, and I'm on my second laptop, so there we go. Nick, if you're all right to drive, and I can do the commentary, that'd be really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was just delving into my distant memories as previous library director at Senate House Library, thinking, how does this match? But I'll stop talking and I'll drive. Do you want me to move on to the next slide, Gary?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Nick. So thanks for having me. So we thought that it would be very, very helpful to just give you an overview of where library kind of sits in the outline that Gerald and Nick have given. Now, all of the, there's a nice little overview in terms of services that are provided within library, but the important thing from our point of view in terms of the OU library is that obviously we serve all of the community, the whole of the community, obviously general public in that sense, so it's no different from a normal library in that sense, but there are particular areas of that service which are heightened, let's say, in terms of the way in which we deliver into the organisations. Do you want to flip to the next one, please, Nick?
Yeah, sure.
I think I'll just say slide in the future.
You say slide and I'll move.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have obviously the same range of services in some sense that normal academic libraries would have, but obviously ours is slightly different. We're not campus based, obviously, but also the way in which Gerald has kind of been outlining the way in which we teach and design our courses. Our library services are absolutely integrated into in courses. So funnily enough, when we get to in the NSS, NSS scores from students and people, students are indicate that they're not sure they've actually been to the library when actually we know they have been to the library because they followed a link through, because the link has been embedded within the course material and looked at that material and used it. So it's a very collaborative embedded process that we go through within the library. So if you flip on, Nick, that'd be great. And this is the range of services really that we provide and expertise that we have within the organisation and within the library, I should say, and key areas of that for us. So you won't be surprised, given the nature of the way in which we produce our courses, that our rights and licensing kind of team is really quite large in relation, I think, to other institutions. So we have 24 individuals in that team supporting the curriculum production with a dedicated focus on copyright and collections in that sense. Knowledge management is another key aspect in relation to where we're heading at the Open University, particularly in relation to reuse and repurpose of material, and that's part and parcel, starting to become more prevalent in terms of the way in which we're producing our courses. So the other aspect to pick up there is the accessibility. We have somewhere in the region of 26 to 27,000, depending on which week I kind of hear the figure, but 27,000 students with a declared disability. We are tireless, I guess, in our pursuit of making sure that our curriculum is accessible. We work very hard with publishers, making sure that their offering is accessible to our students. We also have, in terms of that seamless kind of nature of integration, we use a number of plugins within the browsers, Lean, etc., to enable students to, because we know they go off and search in Google, but when they find the research, the resource that they're after, they say, oh, you do realize you've got this in the library. They don't get stuck behind paywalls, etc. And that's a very important point. Nick, do you want to jog on? That would be great. So the library website is really, given the online nature of how we do things, is clearly the showcase for the way in which students kind of come into and use the services that we have. We have obviously the collection, the content as outlined. We have obviously a heavy emphasis really on that skills development, and obviously the way in which we undertake that is obviously partially different to yourselves. It's all online in that sense, and we have a range of the way in which we're doing it here. We've got live online training sessions, video resources, digital capabilities, skills development, literacies, digital literacies, and information literacy development, as well as obviously the general support that I know that some of you already have, so 24/7 web chat, help support, etc., etc. And the current situation that we find ourselves in, we've transitioned very nicely, I guess, or neatly into working at home. We've got outbound call service kind of running now that we've been piloting for a couple of weeks, and that seems to be going well. But I guess some of the scale aspects that you want to sort of see there, you know, and that obviously they're not happening every 6 seconds, but that's an average over the year. But, you know, every 6 seconds, yeah, you know, a staff member or a student is downloading a book chapter or a journal. That's, you know, 5 million downloads a year. For us, that's obviously quite considerable. Slide, Nick.
Yeah, just working on it. There we are.
Okay. And I think I talked a little bit earlier, but there's a real big push in relation to this knowledge management, and it's interesting, I think, in terms of the moving things online or the way in which we're integrated. So that's something I think for library services to consider in the round in that sense, is the way in which, you know, the service design aspect that comes into this, and the way in which we are linked in terms of the collaborative working that Gerald would have outlined, not just in terms of learning design, but also in terms of integration and working with academics. But obviously a key part of that is the way in which we as information professionals are managing the knowledge base for the organisation. And that's across all of those elements. So the curriculum development piece, which is, well, really quite considerable, obviously, for us in terms of organisation, but all of the other knowledge bases that we have within the organisation. So that's the referable outputs, the scholarship output, the actual digital assets that we own, not just the curriculum, but the video assets and all number of those, plus the university's archive, and obviously student-generated research. Roughly 2,000 OU authored research papers going into ORO, our online research online repository, you know, pretty much every single day. You know, it's a massive undertaking, but, you know, there is nothing in my mind but knowledge and data coming over the hill, and the way in which we get to grips with that, and the way in which that then allows us, as we are doing at the moment around some of our proof of concepts within the use of knowledge graphing and AI technology to advance our teaching, obviously driven by pedagogical kind of research, is fundamental, I think, in terms of what we do and where we're heading. Next slide, Nick. Just so you get a little sense, that slide's slightly out of date from my slide, but it's a 95-5 split in relation to electronic to print. We've got just shy of 600,000 electronic resources, and those numbers for print books and electronic journals have shuffled up to closer to 300 each. So that just gives you a range of the way in which our library is kind of structured in terms of the quality and scope of the resources there. Next slide, Nick. And I think that's us done. So I think the only thing to sort of say is the integrated nature of the library services, and that service design piece, I think, is crucial, particularly when thinking about moving things into an online space, and about how everything kind of needs to work together. Thanks very much, Nick. Sorry I've had such dreadful connection kind of problems this morning.
It's one of the joys of being an online university. When the connections don't work, you're a bit stuck. Thanks for joining us, Gary, and I'm sorry you've had some problems. Thanks also, Gerald, for your session too. And we are getting some questions in. So let's have a look at some of these ones. So we've got one for Gerald to kick us off with. Our university learning design team is so small, they can't give anything like this amount of time. So how can your model be applied in any ordinary university? By way of context, I think there was a recent report looking at the challenge facing the sector, and the cost was estimated to be 1 billion to move all teaching and learning online. Now, no one's suggesting that all teaching and learning moves online, but I think you're right, Mike, when calling out the fact that some of this does cost. And I guess that's something that we're here to talk about as well, in the sense that we can hopefully provide part of that solution rather than having to spin up and create teams and infrastructure across, 180, 190 learning institutions. We might be able to be part of that solution. So Gerald, I don't know whether you want to think a little bit about how learning design can be adopted at a university level.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think part of the answer to that is trying to embed learning design as a culture, and a lot of the reason why we've got the resources that we have, and some of the guidance resource we've got is that we're not trying to just make learning design part of our practice in the learning design team, but we also actually want the module teams to be proficient in those principles as well, and to be embedding those principles. So I think actually what you might be able to do in that situation is to try to develop some CPD around particular aspects of learning design that you want people to be embedding, and to be showing yourself as a kind of a centre of learning design excellence, so that you can then encourage them to be picking up some of those aspects that you might not be able to support directly from your team. So some of those things around activity design, for instance, if you can just get people thinking about activity design, and to be building that into how they're designing everything for online, then that would be a great start. And then hopefully what you'll start getting through from those teams then is information and ideas coming back to the learning design team from those module teams as well. So yeah, I think it's about accepting that actually everybody's got a role to play in that, and trying to encourage that culture.
I think we're going to have a few more questions coming up on learning design. So I'm just going to jump again to another question from Mike around library materials. Can students just use free library online materials, or might they buy the paper book? Gary, that's for you.
Turn my mic on, sorry, struggling there. So thanks for the question, Mike. So I think obviously we have the same document delivery service for our library. I don't think generally we don't buy for individuals an online collection, and most of those materials, well, all of those materials in terms of what they're required to study are built in. As I said, they're integrated within the course, but students are able to access the Sconnell network in the same way that any other institution is in terms of that network. So we don't ordinarily buy in books for students in that way.
It is an interesting challenge. As I mentioned, I used to be the director at Centre House Library, which had a predominantly print collection. And I know that has posed significant challenge, even though it was focused on research rather than undergrad, in providing support for students. And during the time there was a huge shift to more e-resource for exactly this sort of reason. But yeah, it's also about how we support different learning styles. And I was going to sort of link this to another question that we've had around accessibility, because we do have, I think, something like 22% of our students with a declared disability. So there's probably more who aren't declaring, who would struggle with particular study needs. And the question relates to how do we build accessibility into the learning design process, and therefore how do we support different learning styles when we are looking at the teaching and support model. So Gerald's already posted an answer. I don't know whether you'd just like to elaborate on some of that, Gerald, and then maybe Gary and myself can jump in with some further thoughts.
Yeah, so I'll just, yeah, let me just check. Oh, hang on, I've opened the wrong answer. Yeah, so from a learning design perspective, we will cover it in the initial workshop, and we'll be trying to support teams to be thinking about what they need to be covering in their accessibility guide for a given module, because they really need to be making sure that it's as accessible as possible. We've got standards that we need to meet on that, but also to be thinking about where there are specific aspects where more support might be needed, or where there's going to be particular challenges. So that's often around the assessment. So making sure that if they have got particular innovative assessment in mind, that they're thinking about how students are going to be able to do that, and if there's any alternative assessments that might be needed, or if we need to look at particular tools and the accessibility of particular tools, for instance. So yeah, we're particularly interested in learning design perspective in making sure that they're building accessibility into the activities and assessment. And the OUVLE's got some excellent accessibility built into it, which helps us with that. But yeah, so as I also added, that there's a lot from a production and library perspective on that as well.
Gary, do you want to say a few words about the library's role with supporting accessibility?
So library, obviously, as I said a little bit earlier, in terms of involvement with publishers, making sure their platforms are accessible, do an awful lot of work in that space. A lot of work in relation to that, our library website, in making sure that that's accessible for individuals. We have dedicated accessibility support within the library to support students, both in terms of the inquiry service that we have, and in terms of accessing collections. So it's quite a big part of what we do within the library. As Gerald said, it's integrated into everything that we do, and built in. So it's not an afterthought. It's built into the way in which we design and deliver our services to students.
And we also have a range of different interventions and support for students who've declared a disability who can't work with some of the online material. So we have a warehouse distribution service that provides printed packs and printed books, DAISY books, recorded audio books, a range of different ways that we can support students. This isn't to say we get it right all the time. We don't. But we are trying to put as much focus on accessibility as we possibly can, in line with the accessibility plan that we, as all of the English institutions and similar plans, are in place for Scotland, Wales, Ireland, to support our students and make sure we're being held to account for our accessibility track record. And there's a question from Roger about how we offer training for FE colleges. What's the structure of the training and how much do you charge? Roger, very happy to pick that conversation up outside of this space, mainly because we're still working with the Association of Colleges to provide some resource from what I would call core OU curriculum. We're looking to create a few modules that will be offered to FE colleges, all of those who wish to partake of that, and also provide a package of learning design and potentially other support as well. So that's an ongoing conversation with the Association of Colleges. But if you want to drop us a line afterwards, I'm happy to pick up that conversation separately. We've had a question from Pete around what tools are particularly useful for running live tutorials. Does anyone want to pick that one up? Clearly not. We've been using Adobe Connect for quite a lot of our live tutorials. We've had a bit of an issue about recording them, but we've got around that, mainly to do with GDPR and copyright and IP issues. But again, that's something we have managed to resolve. But I think what we've found is that there's been a lot of experimentation with different platforms for live tutorials. So Teams has been used, Skype. We're not actually using Zoom for most of our tutorials. Whilst I find the platform very good, we know that there have been some security issues, so we're tending to move people away from Zoom. But Adobe Connect has been one of the ones that many of our associate lecturers have used.
Yeah, just from
comment.
Adobe Connect perspective, I found that particularly helpful in order to be able to run breakout rooms, and I know that's been working really effectively for ourselves in terms of running learning design activity. So I think having that facility to be able to run those breakout sessions and making sure that people have got somewhere that they can be collaborating on a whiteboard or similar, I think is particularly helpful. So Adobe Connect does that well. Did an interesting session with teams recently using kind of breakout rooms. So I'm looking forward to exploring that a bit more as well.
And Gary, you run a range of live student engagement sessions for the library, don't you?
Yeah, so they're run on Adobe as well. So we do live engagement sessions for each, well, not for everyone, but for specific kind of skills areas within modules. So yeah, Adobe Connect is the one that we use for that, for those reasons that Gerald's outlined.
Really interesting question from Rosemary around how we help students discuss a point together. Are they able to sort this out amongst themselves, cyber squabbling? Or have you found you've needed to nominate a student leader or a member of staff electronically dropping in? So it's really about how we effectively facilitate meaningful discussion amongst peers. It is a challenging question. And we have obviously, as many of you have been doing too, I suspect, been monitoring any sort of, not so much cyberbullying, but digital intimidation is something that we're beginning to see, and it is a challenging space. What we've found though is that many students go off and have these conversations outside of formal learning environments. They set up Facebook groups and other such techniques, and they often find other ways to have these conversations. So there is a bit of fluidity, but it is something where we encourage and try and support our associate lecturers just to monitor some of those spaces, and where possible to drop in or help steer a conversation to a more appropriate place if it seems to be veering off course. But I don't think anyone's yet found a really clear, workable methodology. It does really depend on the course and the nature of the associate lecturer. Again, I don't know whether Gary or Gerald want to jump in on that.
I haven't got anything really specific to kind of add to that, I don't think, Nick, but I'm aware that, you know, that is a problem in terms of the way in which we encourage and engage students into, you know, into those activities, particularly the ones that our tutors are running. And it's something that we pay particularly attention to, so that there is, you know, equal voice within the activities. But it's something that I know that we've done research on, and that research has has fed back into the structural kind of design aspects of the course. I believe that's right, Gerald.
Yeah. So there's a booklet we've got on our blog relating to collaborative activities that might be useful. So we've done this in a number of different ways, I suppose. So a lot of times there is a tutor able to drop in to make sure that things are working well. Other approaches we take in collaborative activities are just making sure that the groups are smaller than the overall tutor group. So if you've got a tutor group of 20, that's going to be a real challenge to run as a group. So if you can break those down into 4 or 5 students at a time, that works much more effectively. And just trying to be really clear on the structure of what it is that the students are being asked to do is important as well. So they've got something really focused that they can do. They know what that goal is, and encouraging them to have ways of picking out which aspects of that task they're going to be doing, so that there's some clear responsibilities in there. But it also I think it's really important to be building it up over time. So not expecting them to do something particularly challenging early on, but being scaffolding up to this, so that they've hopefully been talking with each other and they've got used to that kind of way of engaging with one another over time, so that when they come to something that's a bit more meaty, they've got that practice and they're used to doing it, and that it helps them with that. So we don't do anything massive early on. We build it up through level 1, level 2, level 3. So it'll be further on in the process where they will be doing more amongst themselves without that kind of support from tutors. So I hope that helps, but there's more available in that booklet on how to go about that.
I'll try and squeeze in two quick questions. There's one here, Gary, for you, I suspect. Many of the electronic materials publishers provide are not accessible, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So that's why we work so hard with publishers, and I think we are able to provide printed in that sense. But that's e is our default, but where we have inquiries, as we obviously do within that, and if students are struggling with a particular publisher or a particular kind of resource that they're after, we are able to kind of print and send in that sense and support them. So yes, we are aware of that problem, which is why we spend a lot of our time trying to make things more accessible for our students.
I suspect the sector is going to see a bit of a disruption, Mike, about how knowledge and learning is provided to universities and students. Open access has challenged that. Plan S, which looks at open science and some of the requirement to make more research material available for free via institutional repositories, and just the fact that people aren't necessarily going to be able to access physical print stock for some time is going to force many publishers into an e-market a lot more. But the key thing there is how we look at bundled content provided through JISC and others, and lobbying organisations such as SCONL, Scientific College, University and National Libraries, as well as the Research Libraries UK group. There's a lot of pressure to change that model, and more importantly, change the way it's financed, which is a huge drain on institutional resource. And just as a final question, and this is maybe a point from everybody, it's around, I've lost it now, there was one there. What top tips can we provide when thinking about learning design? So what are the 3 tips you'd take away to help people move online quite quickly? Let's go with Gerald.
On mute.
Mute.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry. Yeah, I'm busy multitasking. It's a bit of a challenge here. So tips. Okay. So for me, I think it's coming from that student perspective. So hopefully, yeah, as I mentioned, some of the resources that I've shared and that are available on our blog will help with that. So thinking about the student first, thinking about developing some student profiles, if you're able to, will be a great way of thinking about that and thinking about some of the challenges for students. And then the activity design kind of process for me is really, really useful, because it puts you in that mindset for each of seeing everything that students are doing as an activity, making sure there's a clear purpose and outcome to it, and then thinking about the steps for the students through that activity. So for me, I think that's one of the key things to be working with, because if you can get into that mindset, then actually over time you start to really get used to thinking in that way, and building up ideas and a bank of examples and exemplars for that.
Gary, what would you like to add as a final closing thought?
So I think this closing thought for me, if you think about the integration of those services, so the design of how you're driven by the user, as Gerald said, because I think that's fundamental to everything. But don't be bound by what the maybe some traditional thinking around what that service is, and think about the integration of the services and the design of that service to students in the round. I think the other thing to pay attention to very early on, if you are starting to move down this route, is the way in which you're going to manage your knowledge and information assets, and making sure that you're applying the right metadata and so on to those, so that you can repurpose them if you need to. And I think I wouldn't be shy at the evaluation aspect as well. So there's another real key piece around evaluating the impact of how you're undertaking things, and the data that you need to kind of support, and then that iterative quality assurance kind of and enhancements kind of cycle as well. That would be my, they're quite small things, they're quite big things, I'm afraid, but that's what I'll be paying attention to.
Gerald, the final thought from you maybe.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add onto that point really that Gary's just made about evaluation, which is at the end of the day, try not to kind of get too panicked, I guess about it, because as you're going along with this, you'll have the students there, you'll learn from the students. in terms of what's working and what's not. And if you're paying attention to that, then you can evolve it over time and correct it, things and adapt things as you go. So I think, yeah, as Gary says, making sure that you're iterating it and learning as you go, I think it is really key.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for your time. If you'd like to find out more about what we can do to help you with this initial lift and shift phase as you start to consider something a bit more long term, there's a link on the screen which takes you through to some of the services that we've talked about today. We're very happy to talk to you about those, from learning design workshops to maybe even helping you build and design your courses, possibly even drawing upon some of our existing material. We are working on a project arc.open, which in time will provide access to not just the course content we've created or open education resource, but potentially templates for online courses. So that's something we're working on at the moment. But in the meantime, please do follow the link. We will circulate the slide deck and we will send round the resource pack via the organisers at JISC. So just remains for me to thank Gerald Evans, Gary Elliott-Sirigotis, and of course yourselves for giving up your time. Hope that's been of use, and thank you very much.